Here's a random aberration for YouTube. Hi, my name's Emily Davis, and for those of you who know me, you're probably familiar with my sporadic, albeit seldom, uploading of songs and such onto YouTube, but today I've taken to chatting with you rather than performing. I have had a random itch as of late to talk about my deconstruction, which I realize is a term that maybe not everybody is familiar with. What I'm referring to when I talk about deconstruction is a process that people who are formerly religious go through as they step away from their previously held beliefs and associated worldview. Deconstruction is unpacking that worldview and trying to find meaning and understanding in what it is that you actually do believe. That's my badly rendered definition of deconstruction. So why make a video about any of this? A couple reasons. Deconstruction is hard. It's really, really, really hard. And I think for people outside of that process who've never gone through it, maybe that's something that they don't realize. There's a serious emotional toll, mental toll to undergo. And it involves a lot of loss. It involves the loss of an identity, often the loss of relationships, often a loss of a community. There's just so much loss. And if you're in a similar situation with me, you might realize that there's not a bunch of people surrounding you who totally get it, who understand it, who you can share that experience with. Most people don't deconstruct. Building that community online is nice. Commiserating with people is nice. Putting words to the decade and a half of deconstruction I've gone through feels valuable. Hopefully it is. So I was reared in what I would consider to be a quintessentially millennial Christian conservative environment. I attended between the ages of kindergarten and 7th grade a private Christian school. It was an Assemblies of God school. I would consider it to be an evangelical Christian school, very charismatic in nature. And my childhood and adolescence had many keystones of conservative Christianity. From a young age, I was introduced to focus on the family content. I loved Adventures in Odyssey. I loved reading Brio magazine. I went to Bible camp every summer. If you've seen the documentary Jesus Camp, that my lived experience was very similar to that in terms of the charismatic practices involved. I attended youth conferences. I went on mission trips. Very familiar with YWAM as an organization, and I attended a lot of their events. I loved Stephen Curtis Chapman, Chris Tomlin, David Crowder, Jars of Clay, etc. I was baptized when I was 8, and I took my faith very seriously up until the age of about 16 or 17 years old. Something that might be an outlier in my lived experience is that I've never really felt any kind of comfort or solace in the idea of eternal life. Quite the opposite. As a kid, I found the concept of eternity to be very overwhelming. Like, I would straight up spiral thinking about it, thinking about living for 1,000,000 times 1,000,000 times 1,000,000 squared by 1,000,000 years, and that not even being 1% of the amount of time that I would live through. It was my earliest encounter with existential dread, and I found no comfort in it. I was an awkward friggin' kid. I had undiagnosed ADHD. I struggled socially. So I do think that the biggest appeal was that there was somebody who not only understood my idiosyncrasies, but designed them. I think that probably speaks to anybody, but as somebody who struggled significantly throughout their elementary and middle school years with social interactions and friendships, that was invaluable to me. So more often than not, when I was in a church service, whether it was at youth group or at my private school, which we held on a weekly basis on Fridays, there would be an altar call. And so whoever was leading the service would invite attendees to the altar to be prayed for. And more often than not, what would eventually happen is I would see people around me lifting their hands, crying, shaking, speaking in tongues. That's kind of where I think a lot of my issues started. I began to struggle during this time because I never felt the presence of the Holy Spirit, even though it is invoked and invited at every youth group and chapel service that I attended at my school. I failed to feel it, and I wanted to feel it. And because I didn't feel it, I began to travel down a very toxic path of self-doubt. And it ultimately really led to self-hatred. I couldn't help but in the back of my mind wonder what I was doing wrong. I really began to criticize and analyze myself heavily. There is something that I am not doing correctly because everybody around me seems to be feeling God's presence, but I do not. I feel nothing. I once brought this up to my youth pastor, and he said something to me that is like one of those utterances that I'm just going to always remember. It kind of defined my life for a few years thereafter. An altar call had just concluded, and I was very candid with him, and I told him, I want to feel God's presence. I haven't received it. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And he looked me square in the face and he said, it's not about you. It's about him. And I held on to that hardcore for years. It put fuel in my tank in a weird way. It was a perspective I really had to cling to because I didn't have any other alternative. Stop making it about you. It's not about you. It's about God. It's about giving God the worship that he deserves. You do not deserve anything out of it. He deserves everything out of it. So stop centering yourself. Hearing me say that now, it feels just, I feel bad for that 13-year-old kid who wanted so desperately to feel God's love but was incapable of feeling it and blamed themselves entirely, and simply wanting that love and connection that was supposed to exist that I failed to feel. The act of wanting it, I chastised myself heavily for, and it became a big preoccupation in the years that followed. I clung to those words into my late junior high, early high school years when I started becoming increasingly involved in the worship team. Worship was always my favorite part of church service, and it was something I felt genuinely called to. So it might surprise some people watching, but the reason I picked up guitar in the first place was so that I could perform worship music. The earliest songs I wrote were worship songs. I don't remember any of them, but I did write them. And every time I got on stage to worship God, I would pray a very similar prayer. God, please take me out of this equation. This is not about me. It's not about performing. It is completely and only about you. Please let me use this time to glorify you appropriately and help bring other people into a place of worship. I prayed that with my guts every single time I went on stage, and I meant it with my whole heart because I didn't want to make it about me. I did want to make it about him. I did want to be in a relationship with God. That was what I had been told since I was young, since I was small. That was the point of it all, was to be in communion with a loving God. And so I, youth group and church-related events became the biggest part of my life for a handful of years. I was on the high school worship team. We had youth group on Wednesday nights and we rehearsed on Tuesday nights. I was part of the junior high worship team. We met on Friday nights and rehearsed on Thursday nights. I did DTS training with some of the other youth group leaders, sometimes on Saturdays. We had youth leadership specific Bible studies that I attended on a weekly basis. Sometimes we just got together and hung out. We had lock-ins. And then, of course, there was church on Sunday. So I was doing a whole lot of church-related stuff at one point in my life. Almost every spare hour that I had on a weekly basis, I was devoting to church-related activities. And I loved it. I had no problem with it. It was great. The only persistent problem was every time I got on stage and I made that heartfelt plea in prayer, I could never get past the ceiling. I don't know if that makes sense. There was a sinking feeling I couldn't overcome. I don't know how else to explain it. That I was just singing to a ceiling. And it was hard to combat. My self-hatred grew during this time. I blamed myself increasingly, and for failing God. I already struggled with my self-esteem, and at this time in my life, I was self-harming. And I had come to a place in my relationship with God where I was what the kids call burnt out. Really, I was just heartbroken because it felt like I was in an unrequited relationship. And I don't know if you've ever been in one of those, but it's the worst feeling where you constantly feel like you're running after somebody and you can never catch up with them. I wrote in a journal once, all I ever got out of God was a cold shoulder. And that's really what it felt like. It felt like I was supposed to chase after and love and give my life to somebody who just kept closing the door on me, no matter how hard I tried. And at some point, I just got tired of running and I needed a break. And this time kind of coincided with me descending into a pit of anorexia that was very hard to get out of. I went to a treatment facility called Remuda Ranch that is no longer in existence, where I remained for 3 months of treatment. And it is worth mentioning that this was a Christian organization. I guess it's this part in the story where the proverbial nail is hammered into the coffin in terms of my faith. When I was at Remuda, I was told that I was incapable of getting better on my own. And to be fair, at that point, I think they were right. I had lost 25% of my weight. They almost didn't accept me. That's how bad things had gotten. Fortunately, they did. But I was so deep in my illness that, correct, I needed outside assistance, and that's why I was placed in their program. But what I was told is that I would never get better, that the only path forward for me, if I ever wanted to get out of a cycle of anorexia or bulimia, I'd have to turn things over to God, and God would have to take the wheel. Otherwise, I would always struggle. I would struggle indefinitely. I could gain all the weight back and be nourished back into health, but I would still succumb yet again because God wasn't driving the wheel and I was incapable of doing it on my own. And I had a fundamental issue with that idea because in my mind, I had taken a series of steps to get to that place. Why couldn't it be that I could take those steps in reverse to get out? How are they able to tell me what I can and cannot do if they're not in my head? Who are they to predict my future? Who are they to say any of that? That's not fair. It bothered me. I think it probably would have bothered me even if I wasn't burnt out at the time. And I didn't agree with it. But I was also, especially in the early part of being at Remuda, struggling hard. I was struggling with wanting to get better every day. I was a mess. I was a wreck. If I wasn't crying, I was isolating. It was just really bad. And I remember there was a fellow patient there who was really quiet, really sweet. She didn't speak a whole lot. And she went out of her way to talk to me one day, and she basically pleaded with me and said, Emily, please, just give God one more chance. Just give God one more chance. Bring it at his feet, and he'll help you through it. Just try one more time with him. And it was just kind of like, I'm at a point where I have no other solution. Sure. I guess. I had my heart was hardened because I was just so tired of trying and I didn't want to go through a closed door policy again. It hurt too much. It hurt my heart too much. But I kept a journal while I was at Remuda and I wrote down an entry, and it's the one entry that I no longer have in that journal, where I basically wrote a letter to God and I said, I need you. If there's ever been a time in my life that I need you, it's right now. I remember writing, I need you to hold me. I am at a complete loss here. I don't need a clap of thunder. I don't need to see your wounds or the holes in your hands. I just need to feel like I'm gonna be okay. I just need to feel like you've got me. I don't know what that looks like, but I need it. And I meant it. And it was the last time that I ever prayed or did anything close to praying. I eventually did find the resolve I was lacking. And I think it was maybe not the healthiest way, but it was a way. I recovered out of spite. Because I was so tired of being told, you can't do it without God. You're not going to be able to do it. And it bothered me so much that I think at some point I said, you know what? Screw that and screw you. I'm going to do it. I'm going to prove you wrong. No wonder I like punk rock music so much. I'm going to show you that I'm fully capable. Don't you dare tell me I'm not capable. And it was hard. It took a while. I gained the weight back, came home, struggled for many more months with bulimia more so this time, but eventually came to a place, and I'm still at a place where I'm no longer engaging in the kind of behaviors that I was engaging in. And it's been that way for about almost 20 years. I want to clarify also, before finishing this segment of the video, I could not have done that without my parents. I could not have done that without some of the world-class physicianship that did exist at Remuda. So I am grateful to the people who were party to my recovery. They made it possible. Absolutely, 100,000%. But so did I. Every meal that I ate, I decided to eat. Every time I decided not to purge, I decided not to purge. Those were decisions that I made. Those were steps that I took. I did it. It was really hard. But against what they told me, I did it. And I think that kind of cemented for me this growing suspicion that I had been trying to fight off for years, but was just kind of coming to a head in that moment. And that was that it wasn't that God wasn't giving me the cold shoulder. It just simply was that he wasn't there. So I went from being a Christian to not knowing what I was, to learning what the term agnostic was, liking that term for a while. I embraced the term atheist for a while, but I think that's because I had a real need for certainty. And I think that real need for certainty stemmed from being told when I was young that faith required certainty, that doubt was a bad thing. The disciples doubting Jesus when they're on a boat in the book of Matthew, bad. Moses doubting God and his provisions in Exodus, bad. Doesn't get to go to the promised land. Thomas doubting God, demanding to see his wounds, bad. Don't be doubtful, be certain in your faith. It's one of those things you have to deconstruct. And so I kind of did a hard 180, I think, in that regard, and identified for several many years after as an atheist, which I think is still fine. It's a fine nomenclature for people. If that's how you want to identify, great. But these days I find more freedom in being uncertain, as strange as it sounds. I'm at a point where I'm happy and comfortable knowing that there are some questions I just can't answer. There are some questions out there that are impossible to answer, and that's fine. I'm not out to disprove God. What a colossal waste of time. I am far more interested in what is knowable. There's so much about the natural world that in the years since I've been able to learn about and appreciate. So the things I am a naturalist. I want to be an optimist. I believe that we have spent so much time as a collective species focusing on what there could be rather than what is in front of us. There's so much work that we can do today to help people today, not because we're hoping to get something tomorrow, but because it exists today and it needs to be addressed today. So if you want to talk about what I'm not, I guess I'm an agnostic. I'm not inclined to believe in God. I have my doubts. One of the explicit reasons I went back to college was to learn more about how we got here and learn about other religions from a scholastic standpoint. And so deconstruction's hard. If you're going through it, I commiserate with you. It can be very isolating. Kind of feels like your chest is getting ripped open. And there's a lot that you have to confront internally and externally. And I pat you on the back. You're taking care of yourself. You're prioritizing yourself. It's a hard process, but I think for many of us, it's a necessary process. I think for many of us, asking for faith, asking for absolute certainty in something that you cannot prove to be certain is incongruous with how we're wired. At least it is for me. Certainly there are people in my life that have benefited immensely from Christianity. I am not here to argue with them. I am not here to take that away from them. I'm happy for them. Life is hard. And if you find something that helps you navigate through it, by all means. It wasn't the answer for me. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed hearing about my deconstruction. I'd love to hear from you. If you want to share about your experience, I sincerely would love to hear about it. This is a topic of great fascination and interest to me, so I hope you got something out of it. I will try to upload more music stuff and other things here. I've been pretty bad at YouTube, but yeah. That's all for today. Thanks for watching.